A farmer pulled a drowning horse from floodwaters, but 2 days later, the governor's helicopter brought a life-changing surprise. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain had been falling for 5 days straight, a relentless deluge that transformed the gentle creek running through Ray Thornton's property into a raging torrent. Standing on his porch at dawn, steaming coffee mug in hand, Ray surveyed the damage with a stoic expression that belied the worry gnawing at his gut. At 62, the weather-beaten farmer had weathered more storms than most, but this one felt different. The meteorologists had called it a once-in-a-century flood. Half his fields were underwater, and the access road to his farm was completely submerged. Ray took a long sip of his coffee, the bitter warmth a small comfort against the chill that had settled into his bones. His eyes traced the fence line that had once marked the boundary between his property and the neighboring Morgan estate. The Morgans had sold to some corporate outfit last year, another family farm swallowed by progress. "Dad?" Emma's voice came from behind him. Ray's daughter had driven down from the city when the flood warnings first appeared, ignoring his protests that he'd be fine on his own. "The National Weather Service says we've got another system moving in by nightfall." Ray nodded without turning around. "Better check the generator then. Make sure we've got enough fuel to last." Emma came to stand beside him, her eyes following his gaze across the submerged landscape. At 34, she had her mother's features. Same honey-brown eyes, same determined set to her jaw. She'd left the farm 10 years ago for a corporate job in the city, but the land was still in her blood. "The Hendersons evacuated last night," she said quietly. "Sheriff Miller called, said we ought to think about doing the same." Ray snorted. Hendersons never did have much backbone. He drained the last of his coffee. "This land's been in our family for 4 generations. I'm not about to abandon it now." Emma opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was no point. Her father was as stubborn as the ancient oak that had stood sentinel over their farmhouse for more than a century. The same oak that had fallen during last night's storm, thankfully away from the house. The distant sound of distressed whinnying cut through the patter of rain. Ray's head snapped up. "You hear that?" Emma nodded, her brow furrowing. "Sounds like a horse." Without another word, Ray was off the porch, moving with the surprising agility of a man who'd spent his life working the land. Emma followed, grabbing a rain slicker from the hook by the door. The sound grew louder as they approached the flooded creek. Through the curtain of rain, Ray spotted movement in the churning waters, a dark shape struggling against the current, head barely above water. "It's one of the Morgan horses," Emma gasped. "Must have broken out during the storm." The Morgan estate had kept a small stable of championship thoroughbreds. When the property sold, Ray had assumed the new owners had moved the animals elsewhere. Clearly, he'd been wrong. The horse was panicking, eyes rolling white with terror as it fought to keep its head above the rushing water. It had become entangled in debris. A fallen tree branch was caught across its back, pushing it down while simultaneously preventing it from being swept away completely. "Dad, you can't," Emma began, but Ray was already stripping off his jacket. "Get the rope from the truck," he ordered, kicking off his boots, "and call Doc Peterson. Tell him we've got an emergency." "The current's too strong," Emma protested. "You'll be swept away." "That horse doesn't have much time," Ray said grimly. "Now get the damn rope." Emma hesitated only a moment longer before sprinting toward the pickup parked on higher ground. Ray didn't wait for her return. He waded into the flood, gasping as the cold water hit his waist. The horse was about 30 feet out, where the normally placid creek had transformed into a churning river nearly 10 feet deep. Ray was a strong swimmer, had been since childhood summers spent in this very creek, but the current immediately threatened to knock him off his feet. He pushed forward, using powerful strokes to fight his way toward the struggling animal. The horse saw him coming and thrashed harder, terror giving it renewed strength. Water splashed into Ray's face, momentarily blinding him. He sputtered, wiped his eyes clear, and kept moving. He was close enough now to see it was a mare, a beautiful bay with a white blaze down her nose. One of the Morgan's prize breeding stock, if he wasn't mistaken. "Easy, girl," he called out, though his words were lost in the roar of the floodwaters. "I'm here to help." The mare's struggles had weakened. Her head dipped below the surface, then rose again with diminishing strength. Ray knew he was running out of time. With a final push, he reached her side. The branch across her back had wedged against something underwater, creating a deadly trap. Ray took a deep breath and ducked beneath the surface, fighting to maintain his position against the current. His hands found the branch, traced it to where it was pinning the horse. He planted his feet on the creek bed and heaved with all his might. The branch didn't budge. His lungs burning, Ray surfaced for air. The horse's eyes locked with his, filled with a desperate plea that transcended species. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a connection. "I'm not giving up on you," Ray promised. He dove again, this time working his way to where the branch was caught. His fingers scraped against something metal, an old piece of farm equipment perhaps, washed downstream and lodged in the creek bed. Ray worked the branch free from its entanglement, feeling it shift. When he surfaced again, Emma was at the water's edge, rope in hand. "Dad!" she screamed over the torrent. "The water's still rising." Ray nodded his understanding. With a strength born of desperation, he shoved the branch with all his might. It finally broke free, carried away by the current. The mare, suddenly released from her trap, lurched forward, nearly knocking Ray underwater. He grabbed her mane, holding on as the current threatened to sweep them both downstream. The mare was swimming now, but weakly, her energy all but spent. "Throw the rope," Ray shouted to Emma. Emma's aim was true. The rope landed just ahead of them. Ray lunged for it, managed to grab the end, and quickly looped it around the horse's neck, creating a makeshift harness. "Pull!" he yelled. Emma had secured the other end around a tree trunk. She pulled with all her might, and Ray pushed from behind, guiding the exhausted animal toward shore. It was slow, agonizing progress, every inch a battle against the flood's relentless grasp. When the mare finally stumbled onto solid ground, she immediately collapsed, sides heaving, legs splayed. Ray dragged himself out after her, his limbs leaden with exhaustion and cold. Emma was there in an instant, throwing a blanket over his shoulders. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," she said, her voice a mixture of anger and awe. Ray didn't respond. He was already examining the horse, running his hands over her trembling body, checking for injuries. There was a nasty gash on her left hind leg, and her breathing was labored. "Doc's on his way," Emma said, kneeling beside him. "Dad, you're bleeding." Ray glanced down, noticing for the first time the tear in his shirt, the blood mixing with creek water. Must have caught himself on something underwater. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Help me get her to the barn." It took all their combined strength to get the mare on her feet. She stood shakily, leaning heavily against Ray as they slowly made their way to the old barn that had, thankfully, remained on dry ground. By the time Doc Peterson's truck splashed up the flooded drive, they had her settled on a bed of fresh straw, wrapped in horse blankets. The veterinarian, a man nearly as old as Ray, took one look at the horse and let out a low whistle. "That's Midnight Serenade," he said, kneeling to examine her. "Morgan's prize broodmare, worth more than both our farms put together." Ray, now wrapped in a dry blanket with a cup of hot coffee pressed into his hands by Emma, raised an eyebrow. "That right?" Doc nodded, administering a sedative before cleaning the wound on the mare's leg. "New owners are some investment group from the city, using the estate as a weekend retreat, far as I know." He glanced up at Ray. "How'd she end up in your creek?" Ray shrugged. "Stable door must have blown open in the storm. Found her trapped against a fallen branch about halfway to being drowned." And you just jumped in and pulled her out, Doc said, shaking his head. At your age. What was I supposed to do? Let her drown? Ray took a sip of his coffee, wincing as Emma dabbed antiseptic on the cut across his ribs. Most folks would have called emergency services, Doc pointed out, applying a compression bandage to the mare's leg. Nearest rescue team is an hour away, with half the roads underwater, Ray countered. She'd have been long gone. Doc didn't argue. He finished treating the horse, then turned his attention to Ray's injury, which turned out to be more painful than serious. As he worked, the old vet asked casually, "You called the owners yet?" Ray and Emma exchanged glances. With the power lines down and cell service spotty at best, communication with the outside world had been limited. "Haven't had the chance," Ray admitted. "Don't even know how to reach them." Doc Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I do. Treated one of their other horses last month." He finished bandaging Ray's side. "I'll let them know she's safe." After the vet left, promising to return the next day, Ray settled onto a stool beside the recuperating mare. Emma brought him a sandwich and a thermos of hot soup, then sat across from him on a hay bale. "You know," she said after a while, "what you did today was incredible." Ray stroked the mare's neck, feeling her pulse strong and steady beneath his fingers. "Just did what needed doing." They sat in companionable silence as the rain continued to fall outside. Neither of them could have possibly imagined how this simple act of courage would change their lives forever. The following morning broke with unexpected sunshine, the storm clouds finally retreating to reveal a sky of pristine blue. Ray awoke in the barn, his neck stiff from sleeping upright on the wooden stool. The mare, Midnight Serenade Doc had called her, was awake too, her intelligent eyes following him as he stretched his aching muscles. "Morning, girl," Ray said, his voice rough with sleep. "You're looking better." It was true. The horse's breathing had steadied overnight, and though she remained lying down, there was a new alertness to her demeanor. Ray filled a bucket with fresh water and placed it within her reach. She drank eagerly, a good sign. The barn door creaked open and Emma entered carrying a tray with coffee and toast. "You should have come inside," she chided, handing him a steaming mug. "Your back is going to be killing you." "Couldn't leave her alone," Ray said simply, accepting the coffee with a grateful nod. "Not after what she'd been through." Emma smiled, understanding. Her father had always been this way with animals, a gentle, unwavering guardian. It was one of the things she admired most about him, even as his stubborn self-sufficiency sometimes drove her to distraction. "Roads are starting to clear," she reported, settling on the hay bale. "Water's receding faster than they expected. Sheriff Miller says the highway might be passable by afternoon." Ray nodded, sipping his coffee. "Good. You can head back to the city then." Emma frowned. "I'm not leaving you here alone, Dad. Half the farm is still underwater and you're injured." "It's a scratch," Ray protested. "And you've got that big presentation on Monday. You said it yourself. It could mean a promotion." "The presentation can wait," Emma insisted, though a flicker of concern crossed her face. Her father was right. The meeting was important. Her boss had made it clear that this client could transform their marketing firm's fortunes. But family came first, a lesson her father had taught her long before she'd left for the city. Their debate was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Ray raised an eyebrow. "Expecting company?" Emma shook her head, moving to the barn door. "It's probably Doc Peterson coming to check on Midnight." But instead of the veterinarian's familiar pickup, a convoy of vehicles was making its way up the driveway. In the lead was a gleaming black SUV with government plates, followed by two more civilian vehicles and what appeared to be a mobile veterinary unit. "What in the world?" Emma murmured. Ray joined her at the door, his expression guarded. He'd never been one for unexpected visitors, especially those in official-looking vehicles. A lifetime of farming had taught him that government representatives rarely brought good news. The SUV parked near the barn, and a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit emerged. Despite the mud and debris still littering the property, his polished leather shoes gleamed as he approached the barn. Behind him, several other people were exiting the vehicles, including a woman in veterinary scrubs and a man carrying professional camera equipment. "Mr. Thornton," the suited man called, extending his hand as he reached them. "I'm James Harrington, senior aide to Governor Mitchell. We understand you're housing a rather special horse." Ray didn't take the offered hand, his arms crossed over his chest. "She's in here, still recovering." If Harrington was offended by the rebuff, he didn't show it. His practiced smile remained in place as he gestured to the woman in scrubs. "This is Dr. Natalie Winters, the state's top equine specialist. The governor sent her personally to ensure Midnight Serenade receives the best possible care." Emma stepped forward, smoothly inserting herself between her father and the newcomers. "That's very kind, but Dr. Peterson is already treating her. He's been our vet for 30 years. "Of course." Harrington nodded, his tone placating. "Dr. Winters will work alongside your local veterinarian. But I'm sure you understand. Midnight Serenade is an extremely valuable animal. The governor was quite concerned when he heard about the incident." Ray's eyebrows shot up. "The governor? What's he got to do with this horse?" Harrington looked surprised. "You don't know? Midnight Serenade belongs to Eclipse Ventures. The governor is a major investor. When he heard what happened..." The aide trailed off, his gaze moving past them to the interior of the barn. "May we see her?" After a moment's hesitation, Ray stepped aside. The veterinarian moved quickly to the horse's side, her examination professional and thorough. The cameraman hovered nearby, snapping photos, which made Ray increasingly uncomfortable. "What's with the pictures?" he finally demanded. Harrington, who had been typing rapidly on his smartphone, looked up. "Oh, just documenting everything for the governor and the other investors. They're extremely grateful for what you did, Mr. Thornton. Saving Midnight Serenade was an act of extraordinary courage." "Didn't do it for them," Ray muttered. "Just couldn't let her drown." "Nevertheless," Harrington continued smoothly, "your heroism has not gone unnoticed. In fact, the governor would like to personally express his gratitude. He's proposed a special recognition ceremony at the State House next week." Emma couldn't suppress a small gasp. "The State House? Dad, that's incredible." Ray looked less than enthused. "Not interested in ceremonies. Just did what anyone would have done." Harrington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "The governor was quite insistent, Mr. Thornton. It's not every day that someone risks their life to save an animal worth over $3 million. The figure hung in the air, momentarily stunning both Ray and Emma. $3 million. The amount was incomprehensible, more than their entire farm was worth. Dr. Winters rose from her examination, breaking the silence. "She's in remarkably good condition, considering what she's been through. Your local vet did an excellent job with the initial treatment." She turned to Ray with professional respect. "And your quick action almost certainly saved her life. Another few minutes in that water." Ray nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. "When can she be moved?" "I reckon her owners will want her back at their stable." Harrington and Dr. Winters exchanged glances. "Actually," the veterinarian said, "I'd recommend against moving her for at least a week. The leg injury needs time to stabilize, and she's still at risk for secondary pneumonia from water inhalation. The governor has authorized me to compensate you for your care and boarding," Harrington added quickly, pulling out a checkbook. "We understand this is an imposition." Ray waved away the checkbook with a look of distaste. "Put that away. Don't need compensation to do the right thing." Harrington appeared momentarily baffled, clearly unused to having money refused. Emma stepped in again, her city-honed diplomatic skills coming to the fore. "What my father means is that we're happy to care for Midnight until she's well enough to travel. It's no imposition." The aide recovered his composure. The governor will be most appreciative, and he's still very keen to meet you, Mr. Thornton. Perhaps when Midnight is ready to be transported." Before Ray could formulate another refusal, Emma interjected, "We'd be honored to meet the governor. I'll make sure my father is available." Ray shot his daughter a look that promised a lengthy discussion later, but he held his tongue in front of the visitors. After making arrangements for daily veterinary visits and exchanging contact information, the entourage finally departed. The mobile veterinary unit would return that afternoon with additional medical supplies and specialized feed for Midnight. As the vehicles disappeared down the driveway, Ray turned to Emma. "What were you thinking, agreeing to that dog and pony show? You know how I feel about politicians." Emma sighed, collecting the empty coffee mugs. "Dad, this is the governor we're talking about. Do you have any idea what this kind of recognition could mean for the farm? The publicity alone—" "Don't need publicity," Ray interrupted. "Need rain to stop and fields to dry so I can salvage what's left of my crops." "Well, I think it's wonderful," Emma persisted. "What you did was heroic, whether you want to admit it or not, and it wouldn't hurt to accept a little recognition for once in your life." Ray grunted non-committally, turning his attention back to Midnight. The mare had managed to sit up on her chest, her front legs extended before her. Progress. "You're on their side now, are you?" he murmured to the horse. "All this fuss over one old farmer doing what needed doing." Midnight nickered softly, pushing her nose against his hand. Despite himself, Ray smiled. There was something special about this horse, a dignified presence that commanded respect. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. As promised, the mobile veterinary unit returned, transforming a corner of the barn into a high-tech medical station. Dr. Peterson arrived shortly after, initially bristling at the intrusion into his territory, but eventually establishing a respectful working relationship with Dr. Winters. By evening, Midnight was on her feet, gingerly testing her injured leg. The improvement was remarkable, a testament to both her natural resilience and the quality of care she was receiving. As Ray settled in for another night in the barn, ignoring Emma's protest that he should sleep in a proper bed, his phone chimed with a news alert. Emma had insisted on setting these up after the flood warnings, and he hadn't figured out how to turn them off. Curious, he opened the notification. The headline made his stomach drop. "Local hero saves governor's prize horse from certain death." There, on the screen of his battered old smartphone, was a photo of him standing beside Midnight, looking weather-beaten and uncomfortable. The article was already generating comments and shares. Ray sighed deeply. What had started as a simple act of compassion was rapidly spiraling into something he never wanted: attention, publicity, politics. He glanced at Midnight, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes. "What have we gotten ourselves into, girl?" he whispered. He had no way of knowing just how dramatically his life was about to change. By the next morning, Ray's reluctant brush with fame had exploded beyond all proportion. His phone rang incessantly with calls from news outlets across the state. Emma fielded most of them, turning away the 3 television crews that showed up unannounced at the farm's gate. Local neighbors, some of whom Ray hadn't spoken to in years, appeared with casseroles and offers of help with flood cleanup, their curiosity about the famous horse barely disguised. "This is getting out of hand," Ray grumbled, watching from the kitchen window as Emma politely but firmly sent away a reporter from the county newspaper. "You'd think nobody ever helped an animal before." "It's not just any animal, Dad," Emma reminded him, closing the door with a sigh of relief. "It's a $3 million horse owned by the governor's investment group. That makes it news." Ray shook his head, returning to his coffee. "Still don't see what all the fuss is about." Emma sat across from him at the weathered kitchen table, her expression softening. "You know, it's okay to accept a little recognition sometimes. What you did was extraordinary." Ray was saved from responding by a text message alert. Emma checked her phone. "It's Dr. Winters. She says Midnight is showing remarkable improvement this morning. She's even bearing weight on the injured leg. Good, Ray nodded, genuinely pleased. She's a fighter, that one. After breakfast, they made their way to the barn, where the sophisticated medical equipment now monitoring Midnight beeped and hummed in stark contrast to the rustic surroundings. The mare greeted Ray with a soft whicker, her ears pricked forward in recognition. Dr. Winters was adjusting an IV line, but looked up with a smile as they entered. Mr. Thornton, your patient is making remarkable progress. Her blood work is normalizing, and the wound is showing no signs of infection. Ray approached Midnight, running a weathered hand along her sleek neck. Tough girl, aren't you? He murmured. The horse pushed her nose against his chest in response. She's formed quite an attachment to you, Dr. Winters observed. It's not uncommon in rescue situations. Animals often bond with their saviors. Emma watched the interaction with a thoughtful expression. How much longer will she need to stay here? At least 5 more days, the veterinarian replied. Possibly a week. We need to be absolutely certain she's stable before attempting transport. Ray nodded, secretly pleased. Despite the circus developing around her presence, he'd grown fond of the elegant mare. There was a quiet dignity about her, a resilient spirit that resonated with his own. Mr. Thornton, Dr. Winters continued, her tone becoming more formal. I've been asked to convey a message from Governor Mitchell personally. He's moved his schedule around to visit the farm tomorrow afternoon. He wants to see Midnight and, of course, thank you in person. Ray's expression darkened. Tomorrow? The farm's still half underwater. I've got fences down, fields to drain, equipment to salvage. Dad, Emma interjected gently, the governor of our state wants to personally thank you. That's a big deal. It's a distraction is what it is, Ray countered. Got real work that needs doing. Dr. Winters looked uncomfortable, caught between them. The governor is extremely grateful, she offered. He's been following Midnight's recovery closely. This visit means a great deal to him. Ray sighed heavily, recognizing defeat. Fine. Tell him he's welcome to come see the horse. But I'm not dressing up or making speeches. Emma shot Dr. Winters an apologetic look. We'd be honored to host the governor, she translated. Please let his office know we'll be ready. After the veterinarian left to make her calls, Emma turned to her father with exasperation. Would it kill you to be a little more gracious about this? This could be really good for us, for the farm. The farm doesn't need a politician's photo op, Ray said stubbornly. It needs work, which is what I should be doing instead of playing host to camera crews and government officials. Emma was about to argue further when her phone rang. She checked the screen and frowned. It's my boss. I need to take this. She stepped outside the barn for privacy. Left alone with Midnight, Ray relaxed slightly. Between you and me, he told the horse, I'd rather face another flood than a bunch of politicians. Midnight's ears flicked as if in understanding. She shifted her weight, testing her injured leg carefully, then took a tentative step toward Ray. He watched with approval as she managed a few more steps, her movements growing steadier. That's it, he encouraged. You'll be back to your old self in no time. Emma returned, her expression troubled. That was my boss. He's not happy about me missing the presentation. Says the client isn't willing to reschedule. Ray immediately felt guilty. You should go back. I told you yesterday I can manage here. It's not that simple, Emma sighed, leaning against the barn door. The roads are still a mess, and now with the governor coming tomorrow. She trailed off, clearly torn between her responsibilities. Go, Ray insisted. The governor's not coming to see you, and I can handle a 10-minute handshake and photo op. Emma looked skeptical. Can you? Without offending the most powerful man in the state? I've been minding my manners since before you were born, Ray huffed. I know how to be civil. After considerable debate, Emma reluctantly agreed to return to the city that afternoon. She spent the morning helping Ray clear debris from the yard and making lists of instructions for dealing with the media and the governor's visit. "Remember," she said for the dozenth time as she loaded her overnight bag into her car, "the governor's aide will call you tonight to confirm details. Be nice. And please wear the clean flannel shirt I left out, the blue one, not your work clothes." Ray nodded impatiently. "I've got it, Emma. I'm not completely helpless without you, you know." Her expression softened. "I know, Dad, this is important. I want it to go well for you." "It's not about me," Ray reminded her. "It's about the horse. Once she's better, everything goes back to normal." He paused, then added gruffly, "Drive safe. Call when you get there." Emma hugged him tightly, then got into her car. As she drove away, Ray felt a momentary pang of loneliness. The farm seemed quieter without her, despite the constant activity around midnight. He spent the rest of the day working on flood repairs, checking on midnight between tasks. By evening, he was bone-tired but satisfied with the progress. The yard looked considerably better, and he'd managed to repair the most critical sections of fencing. As promised, James Harrington called to confirm the governor's visit. "The governor will arrive at approximately 2 o'clock, the aide explained. "There will be security personnel, of course, and a small media contingent." "How small?" Ray asked warily. "Just the essential outlets," Harrington assured him. "The governor understands your desire for privacy, Mr. Thornton. This won't be a circus." Ray had his doubts, but kept them to himself. After confirming a few more details, he ended the call and headed back to the barn for a final check on midnight. The mare was resting comfortably, her vital signs strong according to the monitoring equipment. Dr. Winters had left hours ago, confident that her patient was stable for the night. "Big day tomorrow," Ray told Midnight, pulling up his usual stool beside her. "Lots of important people coming to see you. Probably bring fancy photographers to take your picture." The horse regarded him calmly, her dark eyes reflecting the soft barn lighting. There was something almost knowing in her gaze, as if she understood far more than an animal should. "Wish Emma hadn't had to leave," Ray admitted, more to himself than to the horse. "She's better at all this public relations business." He paused, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Never been much for attention myself. Always figured a man should be judged by his work, not by speeches or ceremonies." Midnight shifted position, laying her head against Ray's knee in an unexpectedly affectionate gesture. He smiled despite himself, gently stroking her forehead. "You understand, don't you, girl? All this fuss when we both know I just did what needed doing." As he sat there in the quiet barn, Ray reflected on how strange life could be. One moment you're fighting to save a drowning animal, the next you're preparing to meet the governor. All because you happened to be in the right place at the right time with the willingness to act. Tomorrow would bring challenges, cameras, questions, politicians with agendas of their own. But tonight, in the peaceful barn with Midnight's gentle breathing as company, none of that seemed to matter. Here was the simple truth that had guided Ray's life. You help those in need, whether they're people or animals, not for recognition or reward, but because it's the right thing to do. With that thought providing a measure of comfort, Ray leaned back against the barn wall, closed his eyes, and drifted into a dreamless sleep, unaware of the life-altering events that awaited him when the governor's helicopter arrived the following day. Ray awoke at dawn, his back protesting another night spent on the barn stool. Midnight was already alert, her ears pricking forward as he stirred. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the old barn, casting golden streaks across the straw-covered floor. "Morning, girl," Ray murmured, stretching his stiff muscles. "How are you feeling today?" The mare nickered softly in response, pushing herself up with surprising strength. Dr. Winters had reduced her pain medication the previous evening, and the improvement was evident. Midnight took several experimental steps, her movement still cautious but markedly steadier than the day before. Ray smiled with satisfaction. Look at you, practically good as new. After checking the mare's bandages and ensuring her water was fresh, Ray headed to the farmhouse. He desperately needed a shower and clean clothes, especially if he was going to be meeting the governor in a few hours. Inside, the house felt empty without Emma. Ray hadn't realized how accustomed he'd grown to having her around again. 10 years was a long time, and they'd fallen back into their old patterns with surprising ease. Now, moving through the quiet rooms, he felt her absence keenly. He showered quickly, then stood before his closet, eyeing the blue flannel shirt Emma had laid out. It was his good shirt, reserved for church services and the occasional dinner in town. Ray fingered the material, remembering Emma's admonishment about making a good impression. With a sigh of resignation, he put it on, along with his least worn pair of jeans. A glance in the mirror confirmed what he already knew. He looked like exactly what he was, a weathered farmer approaching his twilight years. No fancy shirt could change that. The phone rang as he was making coffee. It was James Harrington, the governor's aide, calling with a change of plans. Weather conditions have improved considerably overnight, Harrington explained. The governor will be arriving by helicopter rather than motorcade. It's more efficient, given the state of the roads. Helicopter? Ray repeated, caught off guard. Where exactly do you expect it to land? Your north field would be ideal, Harrington replied smoothly. Our advance team has already assessed it using satellite imagery. It's dry enough for a safe landing. Ray frowned into the phone. That's my winter wheat field. We'll compensate you for any crop damage, of course, the aide assured him. The pilot is highly experienced. Minimal impact, I promise. Before Ray could object further, Harrington continued, The advance team will arrive within the hour to prepare. The governor's ETA is still 2 o'clock. After ending the call, Ray stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the activity already beginning at his front gate. A black SUV with government plates had pulled up, and men in suits were consulting with local sheriff's deputies. Security preparations, no doubt. Ray shook his head in disbelief. All this for a horse and a farmer who'd done nothing more remarkable than refuse to let an animal drown. The world had gone mad. By noon, his quiet farm had transformed into something unrecognizable. Security personnel positioned themselves at strategic points around the property. A small but determined group of reporters gathered at the end of the driveway, held back by police barriers. The advance team had set up a landing zone in his winter wheat field, complete with markers and communication equipment. Dr. Winters arrived with her assistant, ensuring Midnight was presentable for her moment in the spotlight. The mare had been brushed until her coat gleamed, her bandages replaced with clean white wrappings that somehow looked more professional than medical. She's doing remarkably well, Dr. Winters told Ray as they watched Midnight explore the limits of her temporary pen. I've updated the governor on her progress. He's absolutely thrilled. Ray nodded absently, his attention drawn to the increasing commotion outside. More vehicles had arrived, including a catering van. What's all that for? He asked, gesturing toward the caterers unloading trays. Oh, Dr. Winters looked momentarily flustered. I believe Mr. Harrington arranged for a small reception. Nothing elaborate, just refreshments for the governor and his staff. Ray's frown deepened. This was rapidly spiraling beyond his comfort zone. He'd agreed to a brief visit, not a full-blown event. At precisely 1:45, James Harrington appeared at the barn door, impeccably dressed and carrying a tablet. Mr. Thornton, everything is in place. The governor's helicopter will be arriving in approximately 15 minutes. If you'd like to freshen up. I'm plenty fresh, Ray interrupted, gesturing to his clean shirt. Let's just get this over with. Harrington's professional smile didn't waver. Excellent. We've prepared a simple ceremony. The governor will say a few words, present you with a commendation, and then... Commendation, Ray cut in again. Nobody said anything about ceremonies or commendations. "It's just a formality," Harrington assured him. "A certificate of recognition for your heroism. Nothing that requires a speech on your part, though the governor would be delighted if you'd share a few words about your experience." Before Ray could voice his objections, the distinctive sound of approaching helicopter blades filled the air. Harrington's hand flew to his earpiece. "They're ahead of schedule. Shall we?" He gestured toward the door with practiced courtesy. Reluctantly, Ray followed the aide outside. The scene that greeted him was surreal. His muddy farmyard had been transformed. Someone had laid out a red carpet, an actual red carpet, from the edge of the field to the barn entrance. A small podium with a microphone stood near the barn door, flanked by the state flag and what appeared to be professionally arranged floral displays. "What in God's name?" Ray began, but his words were drowned out by the helicopter's approach. The sleek black aircraft descended gracefully onto the designated landing zone, its rotors whipping the winter wheat into a frenzy. As the blades slowed, security personnel moved into position, forming a corridor from the helicopter to the red carpet. The door opened, and Governor Mitchell emerged, waving to the assembled media with the practiced ease of a career politician. He was younger than Ray had expected, perhaps in his early 50s, with the polished good looks of someone accustomed to being photographed. Behind the governor came several staff members, including a woman carrying what looked like a framed certificate, and to Ray's surprise, Emma. "Dad," she called, breaking protocol to rush toward him. "I tried to call, but the reception out here." "What are you doing here?" Ray asked, genuinely confused. "Thought you had that presentation." "The governor's office sent a car for me this morning," Emma explained quickly. "Said they wanted me to be part of the ceremony. I couldn't say no." Before Ray could respond, Governor Mitchell approached, hand extended, million-watt smile in place. "Mr. Thornton, it's an honor to meet you, sir. A genuine honor." Ray accepted the handshake, acutely aware of the cameras capturing every moment. "Governor," he acknowledged simply. "What you did was extraordinary," Mitchell continued, clasping Ray's hand in both of his own. "True heroism, the kind of selfless courage that exemplifies the best of our state's values." Ray extracted his hand, uncomfortable with both the effusive praise and the lingering grip. "Just did what needed doing," he said. "Nothing special about it." "And modest, too," the governor exclaimed, turning slightly to ensure the cameras caught his best angle. "Folks, this is what a real hero looks like." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of speeches, photo opportunities, and formalities. Governor Mitchell spoke eloquently about bravery, rural values, and the special bond between humans and animals. He presented Ray with an ornate certificate of heroism, which Emma accepted on her father's behalf when Ray made no move to take it. Throughout it all, Ray stood stoically, offering monosyllabic responses when directly addressed. His discomfort was palpable, but the governor's team expertly worked around it, framing his reticence as humble modesty. Finally, the ceremony portion concluded, and they moved to the barn to check on Midnight. The mayor, apparently unfazed by all the commotion, greeted the governor with the same gentle curiosity she showed everyone. "She's magnificent," Mitchell marveled, carefully stroking her neck under Dr. Winter's watchful eye. "Absolutely magnificent. And to think we almost lost her." He turned to Ray, his expression suddenly more genuine than it had been during the public ceremony. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Thornton. Truly." Ray, more comfortable now that they were away from the cameras, nodded. "She's a fighter. Did most of the work herself." The governor smiled, then glanced around to ensure they had a measure of privacy. His aide, Harrington, stood at a discreet distance, along with Emma and Dr. Winters. The media had been restricted to the outdoor ceremony area. "Mr. Thornton," Mitchell said, his voice lower, more confidential, "I'd like to discuss something with you. A proposition, if you will." Ray's guard immediately went up. In his experience, propositions from politicians rarely benefited the average farmer. What kind of proposition? Governor Mitchell's eyes gleamed with what appeared to be genuine excitement. How would you feel about becoming Midnight's permanent caretaker? The question caught Ray completely off guard. I don't follow. Eclipse Ventures, the investment group that owns Midnight, we've been discussing her future, Mitchell explained. After what happened and seeing the bond you formed with her, we're considering retiring her from breeding and allowing her to live out her days here, on your farm. Ray stared at the governor, speechless for the first time that day. Of course, Mitchell continued, you would be generously compensated for her care, and there might be other opportunities as well, educational programs perhaps. Midnight's story is inspiring, a testament to resilience and second chances. Before Ray could formulate a response, Harrington stepped forward, checking his watch. Governor, we need to depart soon if you're going to make the budget meeting. Mitchell nodded, then turned back to Ray. Think about it, Mr. Thornton. James will be in touch with the details. He shook Ray's hand once more, posed for a few final photos with Midnight, and then was gone in a whirlwind of security personnel and aides. Ray stood in the suddenly quiet barn, trying to process what had just happened. Emma approached, her expression a mix of confusion and excitement. Dad? What did the governor say to you? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ray turned to his daughter, still dazed. He wants to give me the horse, he said simply. Midnight. He wants her to stay here, permanently. Emma's eyes widened. A $3 million thoroughbred? That's incredible. Ray looked over at Midnight, who gazed back at him with those intelligent, trusting eyes. It's something, all right, he murmured. It's definitely something. The helicopter's departure left an eerie quiet in its wake. The media packed up their equipment, security personnel dismantled their checkpoints, and within an hour, Ray's farm had almost returned to its previous state. Almost, except for the trampled winter wheat field, the lingering scent of expensive cologne in his barn, and the framed certificate now propped awkwardly against his kitchen wall. Emma had stayed behind, calling her boss to explain that she needed one more day. Judging by her side of the conversation, the explanation wasn't well received, but Emma held her ground. Now, sitting across from her father at the kitchen table, she couldn't contain her excitement. This is incredible, Dad. Do you realize what this could mean for the farm? Ray nursed a cup of coffee, his third since the governor's departure. It means more commotion, more people tramping around my property, more time spent on appearances instead of actual work. Emma sighed, her enthusiasm dampened by her father's characteristic pessimism. It means financial security. Midnight's care would be fully funded. The governor mentioned educational programs. That could bring in additional revenue, not to mention the publicity value. Don't need publicity, Ray muttered, the phrase becoming his mantra lately. Everyone needs publicity, Emma countered, especially small farmers struggling to compete with corporate agriculture. This could put Thornton Farms on the map. Ray regarded his daughter with a mixture of pride and frustration. She'd always been sharp, always able to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. It was what made her successful in her city career. But she'd been away from the farm for a decade, and sometimes he felt she'd forgotten the realities of agricultural life. I'm not interested in being on the map, he said. Just want to work my land in peace, same as I've always done. Emma leaned forward, her expression earnest. Dad, please just think about it. This isn't just about Midnight or publicity. It's about the future of this place, your legacy. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Legacy. Ray had thought about it often as he'd passed 60 and begun to feel the weight of the years. The Thornton farm had been in the family for 4 generations, but with Emma established in her city career, its future remained uncertain. We don't even know what they're offering yet, Ray said finally. Harrington said he'd be in touch with details. As if on cue, the phone rang. Emma answered, then handed it to her father with a meaningful look. "It's James Harrington." Ray took the phone reluctantly. "Thornton here." "Mr. Thornton, thank you for accommodating us today. The governor was extremely pleased with how everything went." Harrington's polished voice conveyed practiced sincerity. "He asked me to follow up regarding Midnight Serenade. Are you available to meet tomorrow to discuss the proposal in detail?" Ray glanced at Emma, who was watching him intently. "I suppose so. Got farm work to do, but I can spare an hour." "Excellent. Shall we say 10 a.m. at your farm? I'll bring all the necessary documentation. And perhaps—" Harrington hesitated briefly. "Perhaps your daughter would like to join us? The governor mentioned she has a background in marketing. Her perspective might be valuable." Ray raised an eyebrow at Emma, who nodded eagerly. "She'll be here," he confirmed. After ending the call, Ray set the phone down with deliberate care. "They want you in the meeting. Said your marketing experience might be useful." Emma couldn't hide her surprise. "Really? That's unexpected." Ray hummed non-committally. "Makes me wonder what they're really after." "Maybe they just recognize good advice when they see it," Emma suggested, though she looked thoughtful. "This is a unique situation. Having someone with marketing experience could help structure whatever programs they're envisioning." Ray pushed back from the table. "Maybe. Or maybe they figure you can convince me to go along with whatever they're planning." He stood, reaching for his work jacket. "Need to check on Midnight, then see about that fence line on the south pasture." Emma watched him go, concern creasing her brow. She knew her father well enough to recognize when he was retreating into work, to avoid confronting complicated emotions. This unexpected situation had thrown him off balance, challenging his carefully ordered world. In the barn, Ray found Midnight alert and responsive, showing remarkable improvement from her ordeal. Dr. Winters had left detailed care instructions and would return in the morning to check on her progress. "What do you think about all this, girl?" Ray asked the mare, offering her an apple from his pocket. "Fancy people wanting to make you a permanent resident. Probably have some angle I'm not seeing yet." Midnight accepted the apple with gentle lips, then nudged Ray's shoulder as if in reassurance. Despite his misgivings, Ray couldn't deny the connection he felt with the horse. She had a calm, dignified presence that somehow soothed his jangled nerves. He spent the rest of the afternoon working on the fence line, the physical labor helping to clear his head. By the time he returned to the house for dinner, he'd reached a tentative decision. Emma had prepared a simple meal, and they ate in companionable silence for a while before she broached the subject again. "Have you thought more about the governor's offer?" Ray nodded, setting down his fork. "I'm willing to listen. That's all I'm committing to right now." Emma smiled, recognizing this small concession as significant. "That's fair. Let's hear what they're proposing before making any decisions." "There are conditions," Ray added, his expression serious. "Whatever they want to do, it can't interfere with the normal operation of this farm. I won't have my fields turned into parking lots or my barn into some kind of tourist attraction." "Absolutely," Emma agreed quickly. "We'll make that clear from the outset." Ray studied his daughter, noting the "we" with a mixture of amusement and gratitude. Despite their different perspectives, Emma was firmly on his side. It was comforting to know he wouldn't be facing tomorrow's meeting alone. "There's something else," he said after a moment. "If we do this, and that's still a big if, I want it documented that Midnight comes to you when I'm gone. Not back to the investment group, not to the state, to you." Emma's eyes widened. "Dad, I don't know anything about caring for a horse, and my apartment barely has room for a houseplant, let alone—" "You'd figure it out," Ray interrupted. "Or you'd find her a good home with someone who'd treat her right. I just want to know she'll be looked after properly." The implication that Ray was thinking about his own mortality, about a future beyond his time on the farm, hung in the air between them. Emma reached across the table and squeezed her father's weathered hand. "Okay," she said softly. "If that's what you want, we'll make it happen." The next morning dawned clear and mild, the recent floodwaters continuing their steady retreat. Ray was up before sunrise, completing his essential chores and checking on midnight, before showering and changing into clean clothes, the blue flannel shirt again, at Emma's insistence. Dr. Winters arrived at 8:30, conducting a thorough examination of Midnight and pronouncing herself highly satisfied with the mare's progress. "She's remarkably resilient," she told Ray. "The improvement in just these few days is extraordinary." Ray nodded, pleased, but not surprised. "Got a strong spirit, this one." James Harrington arrived precisely at 10 a.m., this time accompanied by a woman he introduced as Lydia Chen, Eclipse Ventures legal counsel. They settled around Ray's kitchen table, the polished briefcases and designer suits of the visitors incongruous against the worn farmhouse furnishings. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Mr. Thornton," Harrington began, his manner professional but warmer than during the governor's visit. "As discussed, Governor Mitchell and the other investors in Eclipse Ventures have been deeply moved by Midnight's rescue and her subsequent bond with you." Ray nodded, saying nothing, his face impassive. Beside him, Emma sat with a notepad, her posture alert and engaged. "We've prepared a comprehensive proposal," Harrington continued, nodding to Ms. Chen, who extracted several documents from her briefcase. "In essence, Eclipse Ventures would like to establish Midnight's permanent residence here at Thornton Farms, with you as her primary caretaker." Ms. Chen took over, her tone precise and efficient. The arrangement would include full financial support for Midnight's care, feed, veterinary expenses, special equipment, everything she requires. Additionally, we're prepared to offer a monthly stipend for your time and expertise. She slid a document across the table. Emma gasped softly as she saw the figure. Even Ray's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's generous," he acknowledged cautiously. "Midnight is a valuable asset," Ms. Chen replied matter-of-factly. "Her care should be compensated accordingly." Harrington leaned forward, his expression earnest. "There's more, Mr. Thornton. The governor sees tremendous potential for educational and public relations opportunities. Midnight's story is compelling. A championship thoroughbred rescued from certain death by a local farmer. It resonates with people." "What kind of opportunities are we talking about?" Emma asked, her marketing instincts clearly engaged. "Controlled, limited public access," Harrington explained. "School groups, perhaps. Media features. Nothing that would disrupt the day-to-day operations of your farm." Ray and Emma exchanged glances. So far, the proposal sounded reasonable, almost too good to be true, which made Ray wonder what the catch might be. "And what does the governor get out of all this?" he asked bluntly. A flicker of something, discomfort, amusement, crossed Harrington's face before his professional mask returned. "Governor Mitchell is genuinely fond of Midnight, and he recognizes a compelling narrative when he sees one. The public response to your heroism has been overwhelmingly positive." "Politics," Ray said flatly. "This is about politics." Harrington spread his hands in a gesture of candid acknowledgement. "The governor is, by definition, a political figure, but his admiration for what you did is sincere, Mr. Thornton, as is this offer." Ms. Chen cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps we should review the specific terms before making any decisions. There's quite a bit of detail to cover." As she began outlining the legal aspects of the proposed arrangement, Ray listened attentively, his weathered face revealing nothing of his internal deliberations. Beside him, Emma took detailed notes, occasionally asking sharp, pertinent questions that earned approving nods from the Eclipse representatives. The future of Thornton Farms, and of the magnificent horse who had so unexpectedly entered their lives, hung in the balance of this discussion. And Ray knew that whatever decision he made would irrevocably alter the quiet, predictable existence he had built for himself over 6 decades of rural life. 2 hours into the meeting, Ray's kitchen table had disappeared beneath a spread of legal documents, financial projections, and marketing materials. Ms. Chen had methodically explained each aspect of the proposal, her precise language occasionally requiring translation into what Emma jokingly called regular human speech. The arrangement was more comprehensive than Ray had anticipated. Beyond Midnight's care and the generous stipend, Eclipse Ventures proposed funding significant improvements to Thornton Farms, a state-of-the-art stable facility, pasture irrigation systems, and restoration of the historic barn to serve as an educational center. These improvements would remain yours regardless of how long the arrangement continues, Ms. Chen emphasized. Consider them an investment in the infrastructure of Thornton Farms. Ray leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. And how long does this arrangement continue exactly? The initial agreement is for 5 years, Harrington replied, with options to renew based on mutual satisfaction. And if I decide it's not working out? Ray pressed. What happens to Midnight then? Ms. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. Eclipse Ventures would retain ownership of Midnight Serenade. If you terminated the agreement, she would be relocated to another suitable facility. Ray frowned. That wasn't what he wanted to hear. So I'd be caring for her, bonding with her, but she wouldn't really be mine. Legally speaking, no, Ms. Chen confirmed. However, you would have full daily authority regarding her care and well-being. Emma had been quiet for several minutes, reviewing her notes. Now she looked up. What about my father's request? That Midnight would come to me if anything happened to him? Harrington and Ms. Chen exchanged glances. We would need to discuss that with the other investors, Harrington said carefully. It's not a standard arrangement for an asset of Midnight's value. She's not an asset, Ray said firmly. She's a living creature who's been through hell and deserves some security. A flicker of genuine emotion crossed Ms. Chen's composed features. I understand your sentiment, Mr. Thornton. Truly. But from a legal perspective, we're discussing a thoroughbred valued at over $3 million. The investors have certain expectations regarding their return on investment. What return? Ray challenged. You said she's being retired from breeding. Her promotional value remains significant, Harrington explained. The Midnight Serenade story has tremendous public appeal. The educational programs, media features, merchandise potential. Merchandise? Ray interrupted, his expression darkening. You want to sell t-shirts with her picture on them? Harrington backpedaled quickly. That was merely an example of potential opportunities. Nothing would proceed without your approval, of course. Emma intervened before her father's growing irritation could derail the meeting. I think we need to step back and consider the core elements of this proposal. The improvements to the farm alone represent a significant investment in Thornton Farm's future. Ray shot his daughter a look that said he knew exactly what she was doing, but he allowed her to continue. What if we proposed a modified arrangement, Emma suggested, one that addresses both Eclipse Ventures' financial interests and my father's concern for Midnight's long-term welfare? Ms. Chen raised an eyebrow, interested. What did you have in mind? Emma leaned forward, her marketing experience evident in her confident articulation. A gradual transfer of ownership. Eclipse Ventures retains full ownership initially, but with each year my father successfully cares for Midnight, he gains an equity percentage. After the 5-year term, he would own a majority stake, with Eclipse retaining a minority interest to protect their promotional rights. Harrington looked intrigued. And in the event of your father's retirement? The ownership arrangement would transfer to me, Emma said smoothly, ensuring continuity of care while maintaining Eclipse's investment interests. Ray watched his daughter with undisguised pride. She was negotiating like a seasoned professional, finding middle ground where he would have seen only an impasse. Ms. Chen made several notes. It's an interesting proposal. I would need to present it to the board, of course, but it addresses several concerns in a creative way. She glanced at her watch. Perhaps this is a good moment to take a break? I can make some calls, and you and your father can discuss the proposal privately. After Harrington and Ms. Chen stepped outside to use their phones, Ray turned to Emma with raised eyebrows. Equity percentage? Where'd that come from? Emma smiled. My firm handled a similar arrangement for a championship racing dog last year. It's not common, but there's precedent. Her smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. Dad, this could secure the farm's future. Those infrastructure improvements alone would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars if you had to fund them yourself. Ray nodded slowly. I know. Just don't like the idea of turning the place into some kind of tourist attraction. It wouldn't be, Emma assured him. The way they've structured the educational component, it would be limited groups, by appointment only. And you'd have approval rights. Ray was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where he could see Midnight grazing peacefully in the temporary paddock Dr. Winters had set up. The mare's coat gleamed in the midday sun, her movements showing remarkable recovery from her injuries. She deserves a good life, he said finally, after what she's been through. Emma followed his gaze. So do you, Dad, and this farm. When Harrington and Ms. Chen returned, negotiations continued with renewed focus. By late afternoon, they had hammered out a modified agreement that incorporated Emma's equity transfer proposal and provided additional assurances regarding Thornton Farm's operational independence. I believe this addresses your core concerns, Mr. Thornton, Ms. Chen said, organizing the revised documents into a neat stack. We'll prepare a clean draft for your review within 48 hours. I would suggest having your own attorney look it over before signing. Don't have an attorney, Ray said bluntly. Emma interjected quickly. I have a colleague who specializes in contract law. He'll review it for us. After Harrington and Ms. Chen departed, promising to return with the finalized agreement later in the week, Ray and Emma sat in weary silence at the kitchen table, the remnants of their coffee long since cold. Well, Emma said finally, that was intense. Ray grunted in agreement, rubbing his eyes. You were impressive in there. All that negotiating. Never knew you had it in you. Emma smiled, pleased by the rare compliment. I've picked up a few things in the corporate world. Comes in handy sometimes. Suppose it does. Ray stood, stretching his back. Think I need some air. Going to check on Midnight. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the recovering landscape. The floodwaters had receded considerably, revealing the familiar contours of the land Ray had worked for over 40 years. He made his way to Midnight's paddock, where the mare greeted him with a soft whicker of recognition. Hey there, girl, Ray said softly, offering his palm for her to sniff. Had a long meeting about you today. Lots of fancy talk about your future. Midnight nudged his hand gently, then pressed her forehead against his chest in the affectionate gesture that had become her habit. Ray stroked her neck, taking comfort in the solid warmth of her presence. Looks like you might be staying on, he told her. Got your own luxury accommodations coming and everything. Probably nicer than my house before long. Emma approached quietly, coming to stand beside her father at the fence. She looks happy here, she observed, like she belongs. Ray nodded. Got a good spirit, this one. Fighter. They stood in companionable silence, watching Midnight explore her paddock with increasing confidence, her injured leg barely showing a limp now. You know, Emma said after a while, I was thinking about what you said earlier, about legacy. Ray glanced at his daughter, waiting for her to continue. Maybe this is part of yours, she suggested. Not just the farm, but this, she gestured toward Midnight. Saving her, giving her a second chance, creating something new here that helps others learn about these animals. Ray considered this, turning the idea over in his mind like a stone he was examining for flaws. "Never thought of legacy that way," he admitted. "Always figured it was about keeping the land, passing it down." "It's about impact," Emma said. "The mark you leave, the lives you touch." She smiled at her father. "By that measure, you've already got quite a legacy going." Ray felt a sudden, unexpected tightness in his chest. Not physical pain, but an emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, perhaps, or the recognition that his daughter, who he'd sometimes feared had left the farm's values behind for city life, understood the essence of what mattered after all. "We'll see," he said gruffly, blinking away the suspicious moisture that had gathered in his eyes. "Still got the final paperwork to go through. Might find some devil in those details yet." Emma looped her arm through his, leaning her head against his shoulder the way she used to as a child. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. You know that, right?" Ray patted her hand, his weathered skin against her smoother fingers, symbolizing the generational bridge between them. "I know," he said simply. And for the first time since the floodwaters had risen, he felt a sense of peace about the future, whatever it might hold. As if sensing the moment's importance, Midnight approached the fence, her ears pricked forward, her intelligent eyes fixed on the father and daughter. In her silent, dignified presence, the past and future of Thornton Farms seemed to converge, offering a glimpse of possibilities that Ray had never imagined for his quiet, ordinary life. 3 weeks later, the transformation of Thornton Farms was underway. The ink had barely dried on the finalized agreement, reviewed by Emma's colleague and pronounced surprisingly favorable to Ray's interests, before Eclipse Ventures contractors arrived to begin work on the promised improvements. Ray stood at the edge of his north pasture, watching as workers staked out the boundaries for Midnight's new stable. The facility's plans, which he had insisted on approving personally, combined modern equine amenities with an aesthetic that complemented the farm's existing structures. No gleaming metal and glass monstrosities, despite Harrington's initial proposals. "It's going to be beautiful," Emma said, joining her father with 2 mugs of coffee. She had extended her leave of absence from work, negotiating a remote arrangement that allowed her to split her time between the city and the farm. Functional but with character, just like the rest of this place. Ray accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Still seems like an awful lot of fuss for one horse." Emma smiled, recognizing her father's comment as his way of processing change. For a man who had spent decades following the same rhythms and routines, the activity now surrounding Thornton Farms represented a seismic shift. "Not just any horse," she reminded him. "The most famous rescue horse in the state. Maybe the country." Ray couldn't argue with that. Midnight's story had continued to capture public imagination, fueled by the governor's publicity machine and Eclipse Ventures' marketing strategy. The morning news programs had featured segments on the dramatic rescue, complete with graphics showing how Ray had freed Midnight from the floodwaters. Social media was flooded with artistic renderings of the moment, some more accurate than others. And through it all, Ray had maintained his privacy, granting no interviews and appearing in public only when absolutely necessary. Emma handled the media inquiries, becoming the farm's de facto spokesperson with a skill that impressed even Eclipse's professional PR team. Midnight, meanwhile, had thrived under Ray's care. Her leg had healed completely, and she'd regained the sleek, powerful physique of a championship thoroughbred. Dr. Winters, who still visited weekly despite Midnight no longer requiring medical supervision, declared her recovery nothing short of miraculous. "Mr. Thornton," a voice called from behind them. Ray turned to see James Harrington approaching, dressed more casually than usual in khakis and a polo shirt, though still managing to look out of place on a working farm. "Do you have a moment?" Ray nodded, resigned to the now frequent interruptions from Eclipse representatives. "What is it now? More changes to the stable design?" Harrington smiled, seemingly immune to Ray's gruffness after weeks of interaction. "No, the plans you approved are proceeding on schedule. I actually wanted to discuss the educational program. We've received an overwhelming number of requests from schools interested in bringing students to meet Midnight." "Already?" Emma asked, surprised. "We haven't even finished the facilities." "Word spreads fast," Harrington replied, "especially when the governor mentions something in his education address to the state assembly." Ray frowned. "He talked about my farm in a speech?" "Not by name," Harrington assured him quickly. "Just referenced the educational opportunities being developed around Midnight's story. But it's generated significant interest." Ray looked out over his land, where the construction activity represented just the beginning of the changes to come. Part of him still resisted the idea of strangers on his property, curious eyes examining the life he'd built. But he'd committed to this path, and Ray Thornton had never been one to back away from his commitments. "We agreed to limited visits," he said finally. "By appointment only, small groups, and not until the proper facilities are in place." Harrington nodded, pulling out his tablet. "Absolutely. We're thinking of starting in about 8 weeks, once the educational center in the renovated barn is complete. But we'd like to begin scheduling now, given the demand." He showed them a calendar application with a proposed visitation schedule. "As you can see, we've limited it to 2 groups per week, no more than 20 students each, always with proper supervision." Emma studied the schedule with a professional eye. "This looks reasonable, and it gives Dad time to adjust to the idea." Ray shot his daughter a look, but didn't contradict her. She was right after all. He did need time to adjust. "There's one more thing," Harrington added, his tone suggesting he was broaching a potentially sensitive subject. "Governor Mitchell would like to be present for the inaugural educational visit, with appropriate media coverage, of course." Ray's immediate instinct was to refuse. He'd had enough of politicians and cameras to last a lifetime. But before he could voice his objection, Emma spoke. "I think that would be acceptable," she said, then quickly added, "provided we establish clear boundaries about the media presence. 1 camera crew, limited time, and focused on the educational aspects, not on turning this into another ceremony." Harrington looked relieved. "That's perfectly reasonable. I'll convey those conditions to the governor's staff." He made a few notes on his tablet. "Thank you both for your continued cooperation. This partnership is proving even more successful than we anticipated." After Harrington departed, Ray turned to Emma with raised eyebrows. "You're getting pretty comfortable making decisions about my farm." Emma had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I'm sorry. I should have let you answer. It's just, I know how much you hate the spotlight, and I thought if I set the conditions up front." Ray's stern expression softened. "You did fine. Better than I would have. Probably would have just told him to take his cameras elsewhere." "And that's exactly why I jumped in," Emma laughed. "We need to maintain a good relationship with them, Dad, at least until all these improvements are completed." Ray nodded, acknowledging the practical reality. The work underway represented a significant investment in Thornton Farm's infrastructure, improvements he could never have afforded on his own, especially after the flood damage to his crops. "Come on," he said, finishing his coffee. "Let's go check on our celebrity horse." They found Midnight in her temporary paddock, which had been expanded and enhanced with proper fencing, while the permanent facilities were under construction. The mare had developed a daily routine, grazing in the morning sun, then seeking shade in the afternoon. She raised her head at their approach, nickering in recognition. "Hey, girl," Ray greeted her, offering a carrot from his pocket. "Got some news for you. You're going to be a teacher soon. Got kids coming to learn all about you and your adventures." Midnight accepted the carrot delicately, then pressed her forehead against Ray's chest in what had become their customary greeting. The gesture never failed to warm something deep inside him, a connection that transcended words. "You think she understands what's happening?" Emma asked, watching the interaction with a soft smile. Ray stroked Midnight's neck thoughtfully. Horses understand more than most people give them credit for. They sense emotions, changes in routine. She knows something's different. But she trusts you, Emma observed. That's clear to anyone who sees you together. Ray didn't respond directly, but the subtle straightening of his shoulders acknowledged the truth in Emma's words. The bond between man and horse had deepened over the weeks, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared experience. As they stood there in the peaceful paddock, the sounds of construction in the distance seemed to fade away. For Ray, these quiet moments with Midnight had become a sanctuary amidst the whirlwind of change engulfing his farm and his life. Later that evening, after Emma had returned to her laptop to handle some work emails, Ray sat alone on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple. The day's activities had left him physically tired but mentally alert, his thoughts circling around the future that was rapidly taking shape. The farm that had been his quiet refuge for decades was becoming something new, something more public, more purposeful in ways he hadn't imagined. The educational program, which had initially seemed like an unwelcome intrusion, had begun to take on a different aspect in his mind. Ray had never considered himself a teacher. His knowledge of farming, of animals, of the land, it was practical wisdom, gained through years of hard work and careful observation. Not the kind of thing you wrote down in textbooks or presented in classrooms. But now, approaching the final chapters of his life, he found himself confronting a new possibility, that his experience might have value beyond the boundaries of his own existence. That through Midnight, and the program built around her rescue, something of what he knew and valued might be passed on to younger generations. It was a humbling thought, and one that left him both uneasy and strangely hopeful as darkness settled over Thornton Farms and the first stars appeared in the evening sky. In the barn, now partially transformed by the renovation work, Midnight moved quietly in her stall, secure in the knowledge that she had found a safe haven after her brush with death. Neither horse nor man could have articulated the bond that had formed between them in that desperate moment in the floodwaters. But both, in their different ways, recognized that something profound had changed in their lives, something that continued to unfold in unexpected directions with each passing day. 8 weeks passed in a blur of construction, preparation, and adaptation. The promised facilities rose from Thornton Farms' recovering landscape with remarkable speed, Eclipse Ventures' resources ensuring that no time was wasted. What had once been Ray's weathered but functional barn was now an educational center, its exterior preserved to maintain the farm's character, while the interior featured interactive displays, comfortable seating, and a small presentation area. Midnight's new stable was a masterpiece of thoughtful design, spacious, well-ventilated, with attached paddocks that allowed her freedom while ensuring her safety. Ray had insisted on overseeing every detail of her living quarters, from the specific composition of the flooring to the placement of windows for optimal natural light. The Eclipse contractors had initially bristled at his constant scrutiny, but soon came to respect his practical knowledge and genuine concern for the horse's welfare. The morning of the inaugural educational visit dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the outdoor activities planned as part of the program. Ray had been up since 4:30 a.m., unable to sleep with the knowledge that by afternoon, his private sanctuary would be filled with unfamiliar voices and curious eyes. Emma found him in Midnight's stable, meticulously grooming the mare's gleaming coat, though it was already immaculate. "She looks perfect, Dad," she said gently. "You've been at this for hours." Ray ran the brush down Midnight's flank one more time before setting it aside. "Want her looking her best for the cameras?" he said, the slight edge in his voice betraying his discomfort with the media presence to come. Emma approached, taking the brush and returning it to its proper place on the tack wall. "Remember, I negotiated strict limitations. One camera crew, focused on the educational aspects." and they've agreed to keep you in the background as much as possible." Ray nodded, grateful for his daughter's understanding of his preferences. Over the past weeks, they had settled into an effective partnership, Emma handling the public-facing aspects of the new venture, while Ray focused on Midnight's care and the practical operations of the farm. "The kids arrive at 1, he confirmed, though he knew the schedule by heart. They had reviewed it multiple times the previous evening. "Yes, 24th graders from Lincoln Elementary," Emma replied. "Their teacher, Mrs. Brennan, brought her class to the farm 10 years ago when I was in high school. Remember? For that agriculture unit you helped with?" Ray's expression softened slightly at the memory. Sally Brennan, good teacher. Asked smart questions, didn't let the kids run wild. "Exactly," Emma smiled. "That's why I suggested her class for the first visit. I knew you'd be comfortable with her approach." Ray appreciated his daughter's thoughtfulness more than he could express. These weeks of preparation had been challenging for him, pushing him far outside his comfort zone. But Emma had been there every step of the way, creating buffers where needed, encouraging him when his resolve wavered. "The governor arrives at noon," she continued, checking her notes. "We'll have a brief private meeting with him before the children arrive, just to review the program flow. James Harrington sent over the final agenda last night." Ray grunted acknowledgement, giving Midnight a final pat before following Emma out of the stable. They walked together toward the farmhouse, where the kitchen table now frequently served as their impromptu office. "You know," Emma said as they crossed the yard, "you could take a more limited role today if you wanted. I could handle the main presentation, and you could just do the hands-on portion with Midnight." Ray shook his head. "We agreed I'd tell the rescue story. Kids should hear it from the person who was there." Though public speaking ranked only slightly above dental surgery in Ray's list of preferred activities, he had surprised himself by insisting on this point during the program development. Something about passing on the experience directly, in his own words, felt important. The morning passed quickly with final preparations. By 11:30, the farm had been transformed into a welcoming space for visitors. Educational displays were arranged in the renovated barn, refreshments set up under a canopy near the paddock area, and a small platform constructed where the governor would make brief remarks before the program began. "Mr. Thornton! Ms. Thornton!" James Harrington's voice called as the now familiar black SUV with government plates pulled up the driveway. "Everything looks wonderful." Ray watched as a small convoy of vehicles followed the SUV, the governor's security detail, staff, and the promised single media van with the state public television logo emblazoned on its side. Governor Mitchell emerged from his vehicle, somehow looking both casual and polished in khakis and a button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He strode toward Ray and Emma with hand extended, his famous charisma on full display. "Ray, Emma, so good to see you both again." He greeted them warmly, as if they were old friends rather than reluctant partners in his administration's feel-good publicity initiative. "The farm looks amazing. These improvements have really transformed the place." Ray shook the offered hand briefly. "Governor," he acknowledged, leaving the small talk to Emma, who smoothly guided Mitchell toward the renovated barn for a tour before the children arrived. As they walked, Ray noticed the security personnel taking positions around the property, their eyes constantly scanning, hands near their concealed weapons. It was a stark reminder of how far removed his life had become from the quiet, anonymous existence he'd led just months ago. "The educational displays are particularly impressive," Harrington commented, falling into step beside Ray. "Interactive but informative. Children will love them while learning important lessons about animal welfare, flood safety, and agricultural life." Ray nodded non-committally. The displays had been developed by educational experts hired by Eclipse Ventures, with input from Emma. They were well done, he had to admit, avoiding both condescension and excessive technical jargon, striking a balance that would engage without overwhelming young minds. Inside the barn, Governor Mitchell was examining the centerpiece exhibit, a large, detailed diorama showing the rescue scene, complete with miniature figures representing Ray and Midnight in the floodwaters. "Extraordinary," the governor declared, turning to Ray with what appeared to be genuine admiration. "Seeing it laid out like this really brings home what you accomplished, Ray. The current, the debris, the danger. It's remarkable that both of you survived." For once, Ray found himself in agreement with the politician. The model makers had captured the perilous conditions with impressive accuracy, based on photographs taken in the aftermath and Ray's own descriptions. Looking at it now, even he was somewhat taken aback by the risk he had taken that day. "Just did what needed doing," he said, his standard response to praise, though perhaps with less deflection than usual. Governor Mitchell studied him for a moment, then nodded as if accepting something about Ray's character. Some people see what needs doing. Fewer actually do it, especially when it's dangerous. There was a sincerity in his tone that hadn't been present during the ceremonial visit weeks earlier. Before Ray could respond, Emma announced that the school bus was approaching. The official delegation moved outside to welcome the children, leaving Ray a moment of solitude in the barn. He took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the next few hours of unprecedented public interaction. The arrival of 20 energetic fourth graders transformed the atmosphere of Thornton Farms. Their excited chatter, wide-eyed curiosity, and uninhibited enthusiasm brought a vibrancy to the place that Ray hadn't experienced since Emma was a child, bringing friends home from school. Mrs. Brennan, now with streaks of gray in her hair, but the same no-nonsense demeanor Ray remembered, kept her students in remarkably good order as they lined up to be welcomed by the governor. Mitchell was in his element, shaking tiny hands with the same attention he might give to visiting dignitaries, asking questions and listening with apparent interest to the children's responses. The media crew filmed discreetly from a distance, capturing the interactions without intruding on the experience. True to Emma's negotiated terms, they maintained a respectful perimeter, focusing primarily on the educational aspects rather than turning the event into a political spectacle. When the time came for Ray's presentation, he found himself unexpectedly calm. The children gathered on benches in the paddock area, their faces upturned and attentive, as Emma introduced her father as the man who saved Midnight. Ray cleared his throat, ignoring the camera pointed in his direction. "Don't know about being a hero," he began, his voice finding its steady rhythm as he focused on the children rather than the adults present. "Just know that when I saw Midnight trapped in those floodwaters, there wasn't really a choice to make. She needed help, and I could give it." As he recounted the rescue, using simple but vivid language that brought the dangerous scenario to life, Ray noticed something surprising. The children were hanging on his every word. There were no fidgets, no whispers, no wandering attention. Even Mrs. Brennan looked impressed by their focus. "The important thing to remember," Ray concluded, "is that we've got a responsibility to look out for animals in our care. They depend on us, same as we depend on them in different ways. That's the partnership that's been at the heart of farming since people first started growing crops and raising livestock." It wasn't a polished speech or a carefully crafted message, but the authenticity of Ray's words seemed to resonate with his young audience. When he finished, several hands shot up immediately for the question period. "Did you think you might drown too?" asked a serious-faced boy in the front row. "Weren't you scared?" called out a girl with braided hair before Ray could answer the first question. "How did you know the horse wouldn't kick you?" inquired another child. Ray addressed each question honestly, without talking down to the children or glamorizing the danger. "Yes, I was scared," he admitted. "Only fools aren't scared in dangerous situations. But sometimes you have to act anyway." The highlight of the visit came when the children were allowed to meet Midnight up close. In small groups, they approached the paddock fence where the mare stood calmly, seemingly unperturbed by the attention. Ray demonstrated how to offer a carrot properly, palm flat, fingers straight, and supervised as each child had a turn. The wonder on their faces as Midnight gently took the offered treats, the gasps of delight when she allowed them to stroke her sleek neck. These reactions stirred something unexpected in Ray's chest. He found himself not just tolerating the experience, but actually enjoying the children's genuine responses to the magnificent animal. Governor Mitchell, watching from a respectful distance, leaned toward Emma. "Your father is a natural teacher," he observed quietly. "He has that rare gift of authenticity that children immediately recognize and respond to." Emma nodded, her eyes bright with pride as she watched her father patiently guiding a timid girl's hand to touch Midnight's nose. "He's spent his life learning from the land and animals," she replied. "There's a wisdom there that doesn't come from books or degrees." As the afternoon drew to a close, and the children reluctantly boarded their bus, clutching workbooks and souvenir photos, Ray found himself surprisingly energized rather than drained by the experience. The genuine curiosity and unfiltered appreciation of the young visitors had touched something in him that adult admirers never could. Standing beside Midnight in the golden light of late afternoon, watching the last vehicle depart down his driveway, Ray felt the mare's gentle nudge against his shoulder, a familiar gesture that now seemed to carry a new significance. "Think we did all right, girl?" he asked quietly. Midnight's soft whicker sounded remarkably like agreement. Autumn painted Thornton Farms in rich hues of gold and crimson as the educational program flourished beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as a modest initiative, 2 school groups per week, had expanded to include specialized tours for agriculture students, 4-H clubs, and even corporate team-building events. The waiting list grew longer each week, with requests coming in from neighboring states and feature articles appearing in national publications. 6 months after the flood that had brought Midnight into his life, Ray stood in the doorway of the educational center, watching Emma guide a group of agriculture college students through an expanded exhibit on equine rescue techniques. His daughter had blossomed in her role as program director, applying her marketing expertise and organizational skills to create an experience that was both educational and emotionally compelling. Most surprising to Ray was his own transformation. The man who had once cherished solitude now found himself regularly sharing his knowledge with visitors, his initial reluctance giving way to a quiet pride in passing on a lifetime of agricultural wisdom. He still avoided the spotlight when possible, but no longer flinched at the prospect of leading groups or answering questions. "Your father is quite the celebrity," remarked Dr. Winters, who had arrived for Midnight's monthly checkup. Though the mare had long since recovered from her injuries, Eclipse Ventures insisted on regular veterinary visits as part of their investment protection. Ray snorted at the characterization. "Hardly that. Just an old farmer who got lucky in a flood." Dr. Winters smiled knowingly. "The governor's office sent me some interesting statistics yesterday. Did you know that applications to agricultural programs across the state have increased 15% since your story went public? They're calling it the Thornton effect." "That right?" Ray couldn't quite suppress the note of satisfaction in his voice. The idea that his simple act might inspire young people toward agricultural careers, that was something he hadn't anticipated. They walked together to Midnight's stable, a structure that had become the crown jewel of the renovated farm. The mare greeted them with her customary dignified interest, her coat gleaming with health in the autumn sunlight streaming through the skylights Ray had insisted on including in the design. "She's looking magnificent," Dr. Winters observed, beginning her examination. "You've done wonders with her, Mr. Thornton." "Just giving her what she needs," Ray said modestly. "Good food, regular exercise, bit of attention. Nothing special." The veterinarian gave him a sidelong glance as she checked Midnight's heartbeat. "We both know it's more than that. The bond you formed with her is exceptional, especially considering she wasn't raised as a companion animal. Thoroughbreds of her caliber are typically more businesslike in their relationships with handlers." Ray didn't respond directly, but his hand moved to stroke Midnight's neck, in the affectionate gesture that had become automatic between them. The mare leaned into his touch, her eyes half closing in contentment. "Perfect health," Dr. Winters concluded after completing her examination, "though I'd expect nothing less under your care." As they exited the stable, Ray noticed a familiar black SUV pulling up the driveway. 6 months of regular communication had made James Harrington's visits routine, but the presence of Governor Mitchell in the passenger seat was unexpected. "Did you know they were coming?" Ray asked Emma, who had just finished with her tour group. Emma looked surprised. "No, nothing on the schedule. Must be important." Ray sighed, resigning himself to another political appearance. Despite the success of their arrangement, he still harbored a fundamental wariness about politicians and their motives. Governor Mitchell had been true to his word so far, keeping the promotional aspects tasteful and educational rather than exploitative, but Ray remained vigilant for any sign that Midnight might become nothing more than a campaign prop. "Ray! Emma!" the governor called cheerfully as he approached, looking more casual than usual in a flannel shirt and jeans that almost, but not quite, resembled working clothes. "Sorry for the unannounced visit. Something's come up that I wanted to discuss in person." Ray nodded a greeting, noting the folder Harrington carried and the unusually serious expression beneath the aide's professional smile. "Governor, Mr. Harrington, we were just finishing up with Dr. Winters." Pleasantries were exchanged, and the governor asked detailed questions about Midnight's health that reflected genuine interest, rather than political courtesy. After the veterinarian departed, Mitchell suggested they sit at the picnic table that had been installed near the educational center for visitors to enjoy their lunches. "So," Ray said once they were settled, "what brings you out here unannounced?" The governor exchanged glances with Harrington, who opened his folder and extracted several glossy photographs. "These were taken last week at the Midwestern Agricultural Leadership Conference in Chicago," he explained, spreading the images on the table. The photos showed a horse that bore a striking resemblance to Midnight, being presented at what appeared to be a formal event. A banner visible in the background read, "Eclipse Rising, the Next Generation." "I don't understand," Emma said, frowning at the images. "This isn't Midnight." "No," Governor Mitchell confirmed, his expression grave. "This is Eclipse Rising, Midnight's 2-year-old colt, being presented as the new centerpiece of Eclipse Ventures' breeding program." Ray's eyes narrowed as the implications sank in. "Thought you said Midnight was retired from breeding. That was part of our agreement." Harrington cleared his throat uncomfortably. Midnight Serenade is indeed retired from active breeding. However, the agreement didn't specifically address genetic material harvested before her retirement. "Genetic material?" Ray's voice had a dangerous edge to it. "Eggs," Governor Mitchell clarified, having the grace to look discomfited. Apparently, Eclipse Ventures had several embryos from Midnight already in development with a surrogate mare when the flood occurred. This colt was born 3 months after Midnight came to live here. Emma, her marketing experience making her quicker to see the bigger picture, leaned forward. "So they're using Midnight's story, her rescue, her recovery, her new life here, to promote her offspring, without informing us?" "It appears so," Mitchell acknowledged. "I only learned of it myself when a colleague sent me these photos, asking if it was part of our educational initiative. It is not." "And that's why you're here," Ray said, his voice flat. "Because this violates our agreement." "Potentially," Harrington interjected cautiously. "The legal language regarding promotional rights is somewhat ambiguous when it comes to offspring not explicitly mentioned in the contract." Ray stood abruptly, anger rolling off him in palpable waves. "I didn't need a fancy law degree to understand what we agreed to. Midnight was supposed to live out her days here in peace, not have her name and story exploited to sell more horses." "Dad," Emma said softly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Let's hear what the governor has to say before we jump to conclusions." Governor Mitchell, to his credit, seemed genuinely troubled by the situation. "Ray, I want to be clear. I didn't authorize this. Most of the Eclipse Ventures board members weren't informed either. This was orchestrated by a faction within the organization led by Jason Keller, who opposed Midnight's retirement from the beginning." "Keller," Emma repeated, recognition dawning. "The investment banker who kept trying to add commercial elements to our educational program? The one who wanted Midnight-branded merchandise?" Mitchell nodded. "The same. He's been increasingly vocal about maximizing return on investment. When the majority of the board voted against his commercial proposals for Thornton Farms, he apparently decided to pursue alternative avenues. Ray's anger hadn't abated, but it had found a more specific target. So what happens now? They've already started using her name, her story." "That's why I'm here," the governor said, leaning forward earnestly. "I have a proposition. Eclipse Ventures is divided on this issue. With your permission, I'd like to call an emergency board meeting, present our case, and push for a formal amendment to the agreement that explicitly protects Midnight's name, image, and genetic legacy from commercial exploitation." Emma, ever practical, immediately saw the potential complications. "And if they refuse, what leverage do we have?" Harrington, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "Your father's equity stake in Midnight has been building as specified in the agreement, currently at 20%. If the board refuses to amend the agreement, you could take this story public. The publicity would be problematic for Eclipse Ventures." "Threatening to expose them," Ray said, understanding dawning. "Using the same publicity machine they've been so eager to cultivate." Governor Mitchell nodded soberly. "Exactly. Public sentiment would overwhelmingly favor you, Ray. The heroic farmer who rescued a valuable horse gave her a loving home, only to have her exploited by greedy investors. It would be a public relations disaster for them." "But that's a nuclear option," Emma cautioned. "It could jeopardize everything we've built here, the educational program, the infrastructure improvements, Midnight's security." A heavy silence fell over the table as they all contemplated the potential consequences. Ray gazed across the farm, taking in the renovated buildings, the educational center where visitors daily learned about agricultural life, the pristine stable where Midnight now lived in comfort and dignity. So much had been gained through their arrangement with Eclipse Ventures, but at what cost to his principles if he allowed Midnight's story to be commodified against his understanding of their agreement? "I need to think," Ray said finally, rising from the table. "And I need to see Midnight." Without waiting for a response, he walked toward the mare's paddock, where she was enjoying the autumn sunshine. Governor Mitchell made as if to follow, but Emma stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Give him space," she advised. "This isn't just about contracts or publicity for him. It's about a promise he made, to himself and to Midnight." As Ray approached the fence, Midnight raised her head and nickered softly in greeting, then trotted over to meet him. The powerful thoroughbred, who had once been valued primarily for her breeding potential and racing lineage, now pressed her forehead against Ray's chest in a gesture of trust and affection that transcended any monetary assessment. "What do you think, girl?" Ray murmured, stroking her sleek neck. "Getting complicated, isn't it? More than either of us bargained for." Midnight's response was a gentle nudge, as if encouraging him to make the right choice, whatever that might be. The emergency board meeting of Eclipse Ventures took place 3 days later in a sleek conference room overlooking the state capitol. Ray, who had only ever seen such rooms in movies, sat uncomfortably in an ergonomic chair that cost more than his first truck, his weathered hands folded on the polished mahogany table. Emma sat beside him, immaculate in a business suit, her tablet and notebooks arranged precisely before her. Though she hadn't said it aloud, Ray knew she'd rescheduled important client meetings to be here, and he was profoundly grateful for her presence. Across the table, Jason Keller looked like the investment banker he was, expensive suit, manicured nails, the confident posture of a man accustomed to getting his way. He was flanked by 2 other board members who had supported his initiative to commercialize Midnight's offspring. Governor Mitchell had strategically positioned himself at the head of the table, emphasizing his role as both mediator and major investor. James Harrington stood nearby, ready to provide any documentation needed. "Thank you all for convening on such short notice," the governor began. "We're here to address a situation regarding Midnight Serenade's genetic legacy and promotional rights." Keller leaned forward. "With all due respect, Governor, I'm not sure why this requires an emergency meeting. Eclipse Rising is a valuable asset wholly owned by our investment group. His lineage is a selling point, like any other." "The issue," Mitchell replied evenly, "is that promoting Eclipse Rising using Midnight's rescue story potentially violates the spirit, if not the letter, of our agreement with Mr. Thornton." "Our legal team has reviewed the contract thoroughly," Keller countered, sliding a document forward. "There are no restrictions on marketing offspring conceived prior to Midnight's retirement from the breeding program." Emma spoke up, her voice calm but authoritative. "The contract specifies that Midnight Serenade's image and story are to be used exclusively for the educational program at Thornton Farms, not for commercial promotion of other horses." "Eclipse Rising is Midnight Serenade's direct descendant," Keller argued. "His value and appeal are inextricably linked to his bloodline. We're simply acknowledging that reality in our marketing." Ray had remained silent, watching the back and forth with growing impatience. These corporate types with their legal jargon and manipulative wordplay, this was why he'd avoided such entanglements his entire life. "Mr. Thornton," Governor Mitchell said, sensing Ray's discomfort, "perhaps you'd like to share your perspective?" All eyes turned to Ray. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the attention but determined to have his say. "I'm not a businessman or a lawyer," he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I'm a farmer, have been all my life. In farming, your word is your bond. A handshake means something." He looked directly at Keller. "When we agreed that Midnight would retire to my farm, the understanding was clear. She'd live out her days in peace, not as a marketing tool. Using her story to sell her offspring might be legal according to the fine print, but it goes against what we shook hands on." Keller seemed unmoved. "Sentimentality doesn't factor into investment decisions, Mr. Thornton. Eclipse Ventures has already invested millions in your farm and the educational program. We have a responsibility to our shareholders to maximize returns on all our assets." "Midnight isn't an asset," Ray said, an edge creeping into his voice. "She's a living creature who nearly died. She deserves better than to have her trauma exploited to sell more horses." The room fell silent, the blunt honesty of Ray's words cutting through the corporate veneer. Even Keller seemed momentarily at a loss for a rebuttal. Governor Mitchell seized the opportunity. "I believe we can find a solution that respects both Mr. Thornton's concerns and the investment group's interests." He nodded to Harrington, who distributed folders to everyone present. "This is a proposed amendment to our agreement." As the board members reviewed the document, Emma leaned close to her father. "Governor Mitchell and I worked on this yesterday," she whispered. "It's good, Dad. Trust me." Ray nodded, trusting his daughter's judgment in this unfamiliar territory. The legal language in the document before him might as well have been written in a foreign language. "This amendment," Mitchell explained, "formally recognizes Mr. Thornton's moral rights regarding Midnight Serenade's story and image. It prohibits using her rescue narrative in the promotion of any other horse, including her offspring. In exchange—" He paused, looking at Ray and Emma. "Thornton Farms will expand its educational program to include quarterly virtual sessions available to schools nationwide, sharing the agricultural and animal welfare lessons learned through Midnight's story." Keller frowned, clearly dissatisfied. "And Eclipse Rising? We're expected to simply ignore his valuable bloodline in our marketing?" "You can promote him based on his own merits," Emma interjected smoothly. His performance, his temperament, his potential, just not by exploiting his mother's near-death experience. The debate continued for another hour, growing increasingly technical as various clauses were discussed and refined. Ray remained largely silent, letting Emma handle the negotiations with an expertise that made his chest swell with paternal pride. She was fighting for Midnight, for his principles, with weapons he could never wield. Legal knowledge, corporate strategy, and persuasive eloquence. Finally, a compromise was reached. Eclipse Ventures could acknowledge Midnight Serenade as Eclipse Rising's dam, but could not use her rescue story or any imagery from Thornton Farms in their promotional materials. In return, Ray agreed to participate in a limited series of educational videos that would reach a national audience of agricultural students. As the board members signed the amended agreement, Ray felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't a perfect solution. Compromise rarely was, but it protected what mattered most: Midnight's dignity and the integrity of the educational program they had built together. The drive back to the farm was quiet, both Ray and Emma lost in their own thoughts after the emotional intensity of the meeting. "You were impressive in there," Ray said finally, breaking the silence. "Holding your own against those corporate types. Your mother would have been proud." Emma glanced at her father, touched by the rare compliment. "I learned from you, Dad. Not the legal stuff, but the important part. Standing up for what's right even when it's difficult." As they turned onto the familiar country road leading to Thornton Farms, Ray gazed out at the passing landscape. The flood damage had largely healed now, the land resilient as it had always been. New growth covered the scars left by the raging waters, just as new purpose had emerged from what could have been merely a tragedy. "Been thinking," Ray said, as the farm came into view, its renovated buildings gleaming in the late afternoon light. "Maybe it's time I considered stepping back a bit. Not retiring," he added quickly, seeing Emma's surprise. "Just delegating more. The educational program's getting bigger than one man can handle." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Ray shrugged, trying to appear casual, though they both knew this was anything but. "Farm's going to need new leadership eventually. Someone who understands both the agricultural side and the business end. Someone who can talk to farmers and corporate types alike." "Dad," Emma said carefully, "are you asking me to come back to the farm? Permanently?" "Just putting it out there," Ray replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "For you to think about. No pressure." Emma was silent for a long moment, processing the enormity of what her father was proposing. Her city life, her career, the path she'd chosen a decade ago, weighed against the farm, her heritage, the unexpected new direction it had taken since Midnight's arrival. "I'll think about it," she promised. "Really think about it." When they reached the farm, Ray headed straight to Midnight's paddock. The mare trotted over immediately, her greeting wicker a balm to his soul after the tensions of the day. "We did it, girl," he told her, stroking her sleek neck. "Your story stays here, where it belongs. No one's going to use it to sell more horses." Midnight pressed her forehead against his chest, her warm breath mingling with the crisp autumn air. In her dark, intelligent eyes, Ray saw something that looked remarkably like gratitude. Or perhaps that was just his own emotion reflected back at him. Emma joined them at the fence, her face thoughtful as she watched the interaction between her father and the horse that had changed everything. "You know," she said after a while, "if I did come back, hypothetically, I'd want to expand the educational program even further, maybe partner with the agricultural college, develop curriculum materials." Ray nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Hypothetically, that sounds like a good idea. And we'd need to think about succession planning for Midnight's care," Emma continued, warming to the possibility. "Training additional staff who understand her needs, her story. One step at a time, Ray advised, though his heart lightened at her use of we. Let's get through this winter first. As they stood together in the fading light, midnight grazing peacefully nearby, Ray reflected on the unlikely journey that had begun with a simple act of courage during a flood. He had saved a horse, yes, but in doing so, he had also set in motion a chain of events that might secure the future of his farm, bring his daughter home, and create an educational legacy that would outlive them all. Not bad for an old farmer who'd just done what needed doing. In the distance, a school bus appeared on the road, the last tour group of the day arriving for their scheduled visit. Emma checked her watch and started toward the educational center to greet them. Ray lingered a moment longer with Midnight, savoring the quiet, before rejoining the world they had created together. A world where ordinary courage could lead to extraordinary consequences, and where one man's instinctive act of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could have imagined. "Come on, girl," he said finally, opening the gate to lead Midnight toward the waiting children. "Time to go inspire some more young farmers." The mare followed willingly, her stride strong and confident, all traces of her near-fatal injuries long since healed. Together they walked toward the future, not the one Ray had planned, but perhaps the one he had always been meant to find.